Welcome to Your Education Matters. Here you will find in-depth discussions about all levels of education presented by persons knowledgeable about the field. Here are data and analyses you've been looking for to help make your educational decisions. Andy Hargreaves is the Thomas Moore Brennan Chair in the Lynch School of Education at Boston College. The mission of the chair is to promote social justice and connect theory and practice in education. Professor Hargreaves taught primary school and lectured in several English universities, including Oxford. After moving to Canada, he was co-founder and director of the International Centre for Educational Change at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. In 2010, Professor Hargreaves was awarded an honorary doctorate from Scandinavia's oldest university, Uppsala. He has received the Whitworth Award for Outstanding Contributions to Educational Research in Canada, was awarded a writing residency by the Rockefeller Foundation in order to write, teaching in the Knowledge Society, and is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in the UK. Professor Hargreaves' most recent books are Professional Capital, Sustainable Leadership, Change Wars, and The Fourth Way. His current research is on successful educational change strategies in high-performing school districts and organizations. We are pleased to welcome Professor Andrew Hargreaves to Your Education Matters. Thank you for thinking about Your Education Matters. Professor Hargreaves, you have an unusually multinational background. Born in England, came to Canada, now in the United States, and you go around the world and you study the nations of the world in education. So would you place Canada in this global educational context for us?
Yeah, I'll try to. Canada does very, very well when compared with other countries in terms of educational achievement. Really the gold standard that we pretty much use now is the performance in student assessment that the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, uses to compare the achievement of students at age 15 against each other, not just in test items that are easily remembered, but in the ones that really look at creative knowledge and applied knowledge as well. And when you look at all the countries that are compared on PISA, Canada ranks, varies depending on the measure, but pretty much around 6th. So the countries ahead of it, not everyone ahead of it is a country, but the countries ahead of it are South Korea, Singapore, and Finland, and then 2 zones within China. So Canada is the highest performing English-speaking and French-speaking country within the whole of the world. In terms of other outcomes that are not related to tested achievement, if we look at measures of well-being, for instance, then UNICEF, an organization that many of your viewers will know, has ranked 22 countries, developed countries, against each other. And Canada scores, as Canadians would not be surprised to find, exactly in the middle of all those developed countries. Although it's slightly deceiving, it doesn't score in the middle on everything. It does very well in terms of financial well-being. People are better off in Canada than they are in many other countries. And it does very well in educational well-being as measured by achievement scores. It does less well in terms of things like family well-being, self-perceived well-being, and health risks like drug and alcohol abuse, relationships with peers, and so on.
Yeah, I noticed that UK, Canada, and the United States sometimes share some positioning in childhood poverty in categories like that. There seems to be some toleration of certain kinds of deprivation among these cousins, these countries that are from the same tradition. Now, what do you think Canada is doing policy-wise that enables it to succeed in the international marketplace?
Well, in truth, when anybody looks at different countries as to why they're doing well and tries to map backwards into what it is that causes that, and I've done this for OECD in Finland, we've been looking at other countries as well. It's a very imprecise science. What people tend to do, including the big international organizations like McKinsey, is to focus on the things that they like about what the country or the province is doing. So when they look at places like Poland, Poland's instituted detracking, de-streaming, and a lot of the international organizations like that, and they'll say, hey, so there must be something about detracking, but Poland's done many other things, some of which may contradict the effects of it. You don't know it's that particular policy. So if you talk to people in Ontario, they'd probably say why they do so well on PISA is because they've had a deliberate policy with a tight focus on literacy and numeracy related to targets for tested achievement. But the truth is, in the period that those policies have been in place, they haven't really affected 15-year-olds yet. So it's hard to say, and even OECD themselves admit it's hard to say, is it this recent policy or that recent policy that matters?
It's a complex question, doesn't lend itself to a simple answer. It's as deep as culture itself, is what I hear you saying.
Many people think there's something about, you'd say two things. One is, when you go to Singapore, the minister in Singapore will say, did say, you know, what we try to tell people is one reason Singapore does so well is it's just something about our culture. And you cannot teleport a culture from one place to another. And there's definitely some of those things about Canada, an officially bilingual, multicultural society, a different way in which it treats its immigrants, a different kind of immigrants than it attracts compared to many other countries, a different feeling as you cross the border one way perhaps than if you cross it the other. There's also something that's not culture, but something about the way Canadians as a whole and the different provinces, because of course education is completely a provincial responsibility, K-12 education in Canada, is there's something about the longer term policies that are very important. Towards teachers, for example, towards rewarding teachers, towards attracting teachers from the top 30% of the ability range and not, like some countries, more like the bottom 30% of the ability range. The belief in public education. We have quite a small private sector within Canada. Finland, which does very well, has a non-existent private sector. Singapore, practically non-existent. So there's something about the support for public good and public education that also seems to matter here.
Now, so far you've been using PISA results, but I know in your writing you talk a lot about the qualities that education encourages.
Yeah.
And I don't think PISA gets at that, does it?
It does not, no.
So how about in a qualitative way? Is there anything we can look at to help us understand whether we're succeeding as a nation in that respect?
There are a couple of interesting things to look at. One is the well-being studies of UNICEF that I mentioned. The countries that do well on UNICEF are largely the Northern European nations. Those are the Scandinavian countries, but interestingly, plus the Netherlands, where there is high immigration and high diversity, but a culture that's more like the countries just north of it, for example. You can also look at, there's a very interesting book by Wilkinson and Pickett called The Spirit Level. And in The Spirit Level, what they do is they take a range of countries and also a range of states within the United States, and they compare the states with each other and the countries with each other on their social outcomes, things like levels of crime, levels of trust, levels of obesity, levels of teenage pregnancy, levels of anxiety, depression. There are many, many measures produced by people like the World Health Organization, and they correlate those with what they say is the biggest predictor of these different outcomes, and that is the scale of income inequality within a society. So the more unequal the income differences are within a society, the more negative you are likely to find the social outcomes being, including, by the way, in student achievement. And when you look at Canada on those, it tends to be, again, in the middle or just above the middle. So Canadians needn't be depressed, But it's important that Canadians aren't complacent either about how well education is
Interesting
doing.
you bring that up, because I was thinking of the spirit level when you were speaking, you know, at the beginning of your analysis, and the argument that equality of some type, especially income equality, leads to all sorts of social benefits. I mean, that leads us right into politics. I mean, that's right in the campaign platforms or the anti-platforms of our political parties. That cuts very close to the bone in Canada.
It does, is the short answer to that.
Yes, it does. Well, it's a principle of social democracy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That there would be a kind of equality, not pure equality, not socialism, but social safety nets that provide for the minimum sufficient conditions for life, I think might be a way to put it. And that leads to a whole spectrum of other social benefits. Well, another thing that relates to economics is teacher compensation. You know, we're embroiled here in a lot of debate about teacher compensation, and I wondered if you had some insights into how a society can do a fair determination of what it should pay its teachers.
Well, there's two things to look at. One is overall, how well or badly are teachers paid. And then there's the question of differentiations in pay within teaching. And we can take these one by one. The evidence is that teachers don't have to be paid spectacularly well in order to do their job well. They need to be paid well enough. Teaching is what the organizational theorists or pain teaching is called a dissatisfier. Teachers notice their pay when it's bad. Beyond a certain point, they don't notice it all that much if it gets better and better. So it's important that pay is not a disincentive. Finland, for example, the highest performing country outside Asia within the world, has teachers' pay that is just about on the average of all developed countries. But what teachers are motivated by there is a range of intrinsic factors to support their work in terms of the kind of building that they work in, the amount of professional development, a kind of paying kind, I suppose. So it's really about the pay, but also about the quality of the working environment and how these two bundle together. The exception is in less developed or undeveloped countries where teachers' pay is so poor that, this is one of the issues that the lending banks and the international organizations will not seriously address. But when teachers' pay is very poor, teachers often have to do other jobs. They don't even turn up for school every day. They have no time to collaborate or learn from each other over time. So in terms of overall pay, those are really the two key issues. How about
differentiated pay by specialization?
Yeah. Oh, you mean according to shortage
math teachers
areas
are in short
like
supply,
maths
we
and
pay
science.
math teachers more.
Yeah. Well, Singapore solves this by paying all teachers well when they enter teaching. And it solves it by paying teachers as much as engineers. So the major competing profession in Singapore, a very maths and science oriented culture and country, is engineering. So if you begin by paying as much as engineers, people are as likely for pay reasons to go into teaching as they are into anything else. And then the quality of the working environment
And one last
keeps people there.
dimension, how about merit pay?
Merit pay that differentiates people according to their achievements. There are many ways of looking at how to reward people as they progress through the career, other than merely by age and years of experience, which most people are now starting to agree is not itself satisfactory. Finland pays teachers more when they take on additional responsibilities or additional work as part of their job. England pays people more when they're, as indeed Canada does in a way, when they become a head of department or an assistant head or a mentor for other teachers, perhaps. Singapore has a performance-based pay system, so you will be rewarded more according to indicators of your performance. But unlike many people imply when they're comparing different countries and cultures, test scores and examination scores are absolutely not part of the calculation of what relates to performance-based pay. The United States and Sweden and one or two other countries as well are connecting performance-based pay to measurable student outcomes. And the moment you have, there are really a couple of things about this, but the key one is the moment you have any high-stakes system of assessment and outcomes, people will do all kinds of bizarre things in order to meet the criteria of what is tested. So, for example, if you are asked to take a very difficult child into your class, and you know it will lower your results compared to the results you had last year, yet you are one of the best teachers in the school who could do most for that child, you are less likely to take them in because of the particular costs for you.
Well, we'll pick up on that theme when we come back. We'll be back in a moment.
So we see it in our curriculums, we see it in our school policies, we see it that the schools in many ways have become a reflection of the politics of the Western world. We have identified particular school subjects at the expense of other ones because they're seen as being better for the individual to be successful. And if you're measuring success in terms of economics, then true.
What is a school? What does a school look like based on the ethic of care?
How can a teacher maintain an ethical, caring relationship with 30 or 40 kids at any given time?
What do you teach? How do you teach it? You know, do you just go into school and teach about care? Of course not, because you still have academic expectations of reading and writing and arithmetic.
How do we then promote a culture of caring or a consciousness? That's what this project or this journey has been about.
Andy, some of the things that you've just said relate to research that's been done here in British Columbia by the Teachers Federation in their work-life survey, and we interviewed the researchers on this program who had done that, and in fact, it was a matter of priority by teachers, not salary, but the resources necessary to do their job satisfactorily. That was number one. And salary and compensation came down the line, but the first area of need and source of frustration was not having the resources such that they could serve the apparent needs of their students as they saw them developing right in front of them. Now, you've given a wonderful array of practices in different countries, but it complexifies all these issues and leads me to ask you then, well, how do we find our way through this thicket? Because obviously, many of the successful countries are practicing policies that are totally different from one another.
There are some things in common, but there are some things that are spectacularly different.
Yes.
Actually, even within Canada, there are 4 high-performing provinces. They also happen to be, apart from Newfoundland, whose wealth has increased quite recently, they also tend to be the wealthier provinces. So British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, all perform within 1 or 2 percentage points of each other on the international PISA tests. And yet, in some ways, they have completely different policies and strategies. Ontario has, until very recently, established a long period of peace and stability with the teachers' unions. British Columbia has entirely the opposite. Ontario is very improvement focused. Alberta is improvement, but also in many ways also innovation focused, with very explicit province-wide policies supporting that.
That may offer some prediction of the future in British Columbia too. Our situation looks like it's headed towards something similar. I wonder if you could talk about the objectives of your new book with Michael Fullan.
Michael Fullan and I have written a book with the simple title, Professional Capital, Transforming Teaching in Every School. It's a title and an idea which is pretty much ours, that emerged in the middle of writing the book, not preceding the writing. We wanted to write a book about where the teaching profession is now and how it is under attack in many countries, And the idea of professional capital first emerged from looking at the alternative, which is a world in education globally that is being driven by business capital, short-term business capital, where schools and education are seen as opportunities for making short-term gains by running charter schools for profit, free schools in Sweden, academies in England, by replacing teachers with technology wherever possible. Many states now in the US require high school students to do at least one course online. And this, of course, also reduces the costs of teaching by making them sinkholes for the testing companies to market all their materials, and by reducing the costs of teaching, by eroding teachers' pensions, by reducing the tenure or amount of time that teachers spend in the system, by taking younger teachers and moving them on more quickly into something else. And at first this seemed a peculiarly US problem, but it is spreading very quickly around different parts of Europe, Australasia, and so on. So our enemy really became more the opponent, and what we saw threatening our long-term future, not just of the teaching profession, but of the children that teachers teach, because teachers are the biggest in-school effect on our students. But we saw the dangers of this, and against this then emerged this idea of professional capital, which is also economically beneficial, but in terms of creating a generational change of young people who become productive and cohesive in the life that follows. And professional capital of teachers really is about having a teaching force that exhibits three kinds of capital. The first is human capital as an individual. Are you qualified? Are you knowledgeable? Are you well-trained? Do you have emotional intelligence? Do you have successful prior experience with young people? Do you come from the top rather than the bottom end of the graduation range? And this is something many people agree on now, including the international organizations. The second is social capital. We know how this helps children in poverty if they have access to networks that can help them. It's also true for teachers. So teachers who collaborate and learn with and learn from other teachers, schools where there are high levels of trust, teachers will perform better than in schools where teachers are isolated, disconnected, competitive with fellow teachers, competitive with fellow schools. We also know from key research in New York by Cariliana with 1,000 4th and 5th grade math students that actually both these forms of capital raise student achievement. But if you had to choose between them, high social capital, what your community is like, will raise individual human capital. It'll make a poor teacher acceptable and an acceptable teacher really quite good. But you can't raise social capital, the strength of your community, by hiring a few stars who you think can magically turn it around. And then the third is decisional capital, which is a new term that we've adapted from decisional law, which is about case law. And judges learn how to judge when the evidence isn't always incontrovertible, by having many, many cases that they look at over time in real contexts and also simulated away from them, with their colleagues as well as alone, with reflection and so on. And all this develops the capacity. It takes about, as Malcolm Gladwell, Jamaican Canadian, put this, it takes about 10,000 hours to do that. And in teaching, that's about 8 years. And the research that we point to indicates teachers really hit their stride after about 8 years. So we need to work, other countries need to work as hard as Canadians do in keeping most teachers in the system until they really hit that point and are at the top of their game.
Okay. Thank you very much for taking us around the world and into the realm of values and into the future for what might be held there for Canada and British Columbia. We'll be back in a moment. Who is more free, the honeybee, the herd of horses, or the hawk? Who is more free, the animal who lives in community or the solitary predator? Communal insects achieve a perfect cooperation in living and an utter loss of individual independence. But most animals live in social units, like human beings. There is a balance between cooperation and independence. The solitary predators seem to act alone with full independence. Even they must contribute to the creation of offspring. Can a person have more freedom by giving up independence? Can there be more freedom in community than by being alone? We can't do the experiment because people all live in communities. I'm willing to trade a great deal of independence for security achieved in community. What do we wish to do together in community? We can make the rules as we go. Societies vary widely on this score. Health, education, highways are some examples of broad cooperation. Electricity, water, trains, and airplanes have disparate rates of cooperation. Of course, quality and duration qualify the value of free public education. All the public schools must reach a sufficient level of service to their students. All students should have the opportunity to pursue education, including post-secondary education. Through public schools and post-secondary education, society makes freedom for individuals. This is done in a spirit of cooperation to build community, to perpetuate society. Thank you for thinking about Your Education Matters. Visit our archive and see past programs at youreducationmatters.ca.